And then I look into the dictionary and I'm like, what does Black even mean? It talks about atrociously wicked, destitute of light. And there's some negative connotations attached to even the racial binary of Black and white. We wear white to weddings where we celebrate, but we wear Black to funerals. I'm just existing as a reaction to whiteness. I'm not just me.
Hello, Shayla Dube. So nice to meet you today. This is the first time we're having any sort of face-to-face interaction. And we connected via Instagram, actually, with a very intriguing comment on, I forget what post it was. It might have been for the, I was going to give a talk. I am going to give a talk about forgiveness and racism and that sort of thing. And you posted a comment which really was very thought-provoking. And I was thinking of a response, but then I realized this would much be better like articulated in form of a conversation, because I might not understand what exactly you were posing and my response might not make sense. So I responded briefly. Do you want to let the people know who you are, what brought you to ask and propose that question?
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I am Shayla Dube. I'm in Canada. I wear many hats, but today we'll stick to the social worker one. I am a social worker. I'm a mental health therapist. I do a lot of things, but just so you know, your post was not about the forgiveness one. It was about the lived experience one, the one I posted yesterday.
Okay.
Right. So you had talked about lived experience and victimhood, and that really got my attention right there. And I read the whole thing and I was all intrigued. But I think within that context, you had also shared you had called yourself Black. And I was like, I like everything else that you said, but then I posed a question and I said to you, hey, Kimi, I'm interested in hearing more about you racializing yourself. And I also asked, from your profile, it said you're from Uganda. So I wanted to know, have you always viewed yourself as Black? I think that was my question. The question had layers to it. It was about the Black identity and how you came about to identify that way.
Right. And I hadn't had it phrased. I've heard this sort of line of talking before, but I hadn't heard it phrased the way you had phrased it, in like a very personal question. Because I heard it generally spoken about, like the label and everything. But when I had to actually think about my own, like, have I used the label Black growing up? Did I use that growing up in Africa? I really was like pacing around my apartment thinking like, I'm not sure it was as significant as my tribal identity. Like people being like, oh, you know, she's Munyankole, or, you know, so-and-so, they're Baganda, which are different like Bantu tribes within the Uganda region. And so I really had to like realize that not really. It's only once I entered a space and moved to South Africa that you had to kind of differentiate between white and Black, that I started being like, oh yeah, you know, like I'm Black, and that sort of thing kind of entered my language a lot more often. And I just want to say that Free Black Thought article, if I'll link it in the description below if they want to read the lived experience thing. But yeah, that was a very intriguing question. And I think before before we go into that, I want to know, like, what does the label, like, what does the Black label mean to you? And why did you feel like there was a differentiation between African, you know, the tribal ethnicity, and the label Black?
All right. So it's a very loaded question. And I'm thinking of how I can answer it with simplicity. I look at myself as I'm from Zimbabwe. I was born in Zimbabwe and I only came to Canada when I was 20, almost 21. So before coming to Canada, I was Shayla. I was from Zimbabwe. I was from the Ndebele tribe. That was my language. And there was never any point that race was part of my narrative or part of my identity, or that I actually had to call myself Black. So when I came to Canada, obviously that changed right away. And oh, this Black girl, I was in a social class and I'm described that way. And it felt very imposed, and I did not identify with that. I was just me from Zimbabwe. Even the whole African, I was not African, I was Zimbabwean.
Right.
But once you come here, it changes. You're this Black girl, you represent all of Africa. And so for me, I want to say that there was a part of regression, there was a part of resistance, because it wasn't me. And I did not really identify with that. And then I also look at my skin and I'm like, I'm not Black. So there's that aspect of, and then I look into the dictionary and I'm like, what does Black even mean? I mean,
Right.
I know that very few of us do that. And I'm like, I look at Black from the Thesaurus dictionary. It talks about atrociously wicked, destitute of light, and all of that. And I also know that, having been in Canada, there's some negative connotations attached to even the racial binary of Black and white. We wear white to weddings where we celebrate, but we wear Black to funerals. There are those, what do I want to call them? The us and them, just the whole Black and white. I feel like when I identify myself as Black, I'm just existing as a reaction to whiteness. I'm not just me. It's an invention of whiteness as it is. I became, I don't want to say I became Black. I want to say that that was an identity that was imposed in me when I came to Canada. And yes, I did conform to it to some degree, because that's how the world works. Sometimes we go by what's common. How are you defined? So for me, there are all these layers of what does it mean to be Black. When we as people, we are not homogeneous. We're heterogeneous. So when you call me Black, to me, there's a level of you're putting me in a box.
Right.
It's fixed. It's not negotiable. It comes with, what does it mean to be Black? So you asked me a question. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I feel like it has so many layers. And so I'm Shayla. I prefer to define myself. I don't want to be defined, but what does it mean to be Black? And I think it's a conversation. I think we can't talk about racism without deconstructing the race ideology. The whole Black and white is a racial binary of us and them and others. So we have white people, we have Black people, but it's really a social construction. It's colonially rooted. It's politically driven. It's an imposed identity.
Yeah, I 100%, I totally hear you. And I feel like it's weird that at this point in my very old age that I'm realizing this stuff only now. You know what I mean? Like in 2022, there's this weird realization that in a way, this wasn't a label for like, you know, our ancestors. Like we weren't going around kind of like describing ourselves in contrast to whiteness. And so now it's like, because of colonialism, it brought in the need to like speak in that way, like have that binary of white and Black. But it's like now we have to live up to that label of being Black enough, and feeling inauthentic if you don't subscribe to whatever model that is. But it's like, it's at the end of the day, it's all kind of rooted back to whiteness. So it's like
it is
authentically Black in the modern sense is actually a very colonial concept, if you think about it. Because it's like we're being molded from the oppression of back in the day. And
Right.
That's not the definition we made for ourselves. It's like
Right.
I'm Munyankole, you're in the belly, right?
Right.
Speaking of which, so did you grow up in Zimbabwe?
I did, 100%. I never left Zimbabwe until my first leaving Zimbabwe was actually coming to Canada. Yeah.
Got you. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, like, did your concept of race, did it evolve over the years? And if it did, like, what did that look like from childhood? I know you briefly touched that you kind of had to assimilate once you were in Canada or, subscribe to that, but could you share a bit about that journey?
Right. Okay. So the first time I saw a Eurocentric person was I went to a boarding school. So in Zimbabwe, we had a computer teacher who everybody will call white, I guess. So that was my very first time of seeing someone that doesn't look like me, because I also grew up in a village. So before even going to boarding school, I was in a village where everyone looked like me. Everyone spoke the same language as me. So until obviously you go to school and you start learning different things. So really, race was not a thing for me. It doesn't mean that racism wasn't there, but race was not a thing until I got a job where it was, again, Euro-American centric. So predominantly all the employees were what we will call white, but they wanted a local person who can speak to the local people, and that became me. So within that context, I may have experienced a little bit of racism. At least I didn't know that it was, because it wasn't really my everyday narrative that I'm with people where I'm suddenly a minority. I was used to being with people that look like me, being with people that speak my language. Yes, we knew at some point from watching TV or reading books that, yes, white people were there, but I was not a minority. No one called me Black, really, to be honest. You are what you are. You are Zimbabwean. You speak this language. Yes, we have different tribes, but really race was not an issue until I came to Canada. And I want to emphasize, I'm not saying racism or imprints of racism were not there, because I think that it's hard to look at racism without looking at colonialism. So I can't.
Yeah.
So the imprints were there. Obviously, we had colorism. Obviously, people that were light skinned were seen differently. We even had nicknames for people that are dark skinned, which were speaking to them being not as beautiful as the people that were light skinned. So I obviously, those colorism pieces are aspects of racism, except that I didn't have the language for it. But until I came to Canada, then when I was here, it's a whole different ballgame, because you're put in a group, you have to subscribe to that, and there's no negotiation. You walk into a space, everybody sees a Black person before they see the humanity in you or whatever else you bring to the table. So it became really the focal point. And then I think that when I saw your article, I really realized, because I wrote my paper, my MSW research paper was about racial profiling. And then I realized that you suddenly become pro-race, because that's all you see. You see people being killed, and you see a lot of things that are said to be racially motivated. So has my what was the question again? Has my views different from how I was as a child? Totally, because I really did not see race as as anything, really. I was just me who existed. You have opportunities or you don't, but really my skin color was not part of the big issue that I think about every day. Although, again, there were those aspects, those little aspects of, light-skinned people seemed to some degree have it easier, or you see them everywhere. You see adverts and what have you, but you still continued with your life. It's not something that I could say, oh, I went to bed and I thought about how I looked like every day. But you come in here, you're black this, white this, white that. That's really how I felt. And I think to some degree, there was a part of conformity where you're in school, I'm in social work, and everybody talks about not only are you Black, you're a person of color, you are a visible minority. That's part of the language. And I remember questioning, saying, but everyone has color. So how am I a person of color?
Exactly.
And everyone is visible. So what does that even mean? And this is just a girl from Zimbabwe who has never seen this language anywhere before.
Yeah.
And when I looked at it, it just seems like this terminology again is centered on the othering. It's centered on the whiteness, because it's anything else that's against that, anything else that's not white is something else. So that really just became it. And I remember questioning, but I think my professors were not really able to meet me where I was. It was so like, oh, keep questioning. And I was like, but I don't really get it. I don't understand why I have to subscribe to all of this, because it just seemed like it was just heavy. And not only am I Black, I'm a person of color. Like I said, it just seemed like they are all labels that really doesn't describe me.
They're all labels that they like spring out from whiteness. Like you said, it's like, for example, people of color, it's like, okay, are we saying white people are just people? It's like, why do we have to add people of color? Why are there people of no color? There should be that binary as well, but it's assumed that if you're white, you're just people. And if you're Black or, you know, any other race, you're people of color. See, the fact that it all bleeds back into like whiteness, I feel like that feeds into white supremacy at the end of the day. As much as we want to pretend like it's supposed to help us, it's like,
how is it helping us?
Yeah, exactly. It just makes it's like a subconscious seed of inferiority. Like, always remember your place, you're sort of othered and less than white. It's like an inverted form of bringing back white supremacy. And so even like questioning it, having this conversation, it's like risky. It's like we're just thinking as free individuals who, you know, have dignity. We're not trying to, and anyway, so yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I feel like a lot of people are going to resonate with everything that you just touched on. But so you do anti-colonial work and anti-racism work. And I'm curious, like, from everything that I've heard, I do suspect this is not what other people are teaching and kind of bringing to, you know, workplaces and DEI programs. So I'm curious to know, like, what makes your anti-colonial and like anti-racist work different from other practices?
I think that we live in a world that is socially constructed into this racialization, this racism is part of the social construct. So it's really a dichotomous world where you're either this or that. And so the way I look at it, or my lenses are, I want to even reject the fact that I do anti-racism work. I think that I do what I want to call anti-oppressive work. And so when you come to me, I look at all the levels of oppression or whatever it is that you bring to the table as a unique individual, not as a member of a group. So you can't be pro-race and anti-racist. It doesn't make sense. Because when you're pro-race, you're advocating for that racialization. And then when you're anti-racist, you're saying it's just walking, it's like walking backwards and forward at the same time, but expecting to get somewhere. So I think that I use non-racial lenses. I'm all about my African worldview of being, which is Ubuntu, where we coexist as humans, not as Black and white. So,
and sorry, I just want to insert something really quickly. Have you heard of Dr. Sheena Mason and the theory of racelessness? I feel like y'all would connect really well. We'll talk about it after the recording, but I just wanted to throw that in there. please, by all means, continue.
So you ask about what sets my work differently. I think we have a lot of colonized and intellectuals, people who throw in big words, yet they are really colonial gatekeepers themselves. They haven't done their work. So I'm doing my work. I'm going back to reading about how Zimbabwe became Zimbabwe, how even the whole putting countries into us becoming countries, becoming continents, all of that is part of really the part of colonialism. So when I do the work that I do, I look at mainstream psychology and I go in and say, how can I meet people where they are? How can I do the work that recognizes that we have people's languages that are erased, we have people's cultures that are erased. So I look at all of that piece and I find treatment methodologies. Since I'm a therapist, I will look at within the context that I do find therapies that are grounded in cultural responsiveness, cultural humility. I have psychologists from South Africa that have never left, that live in Africa, who infuse culture in the work that they do. So when I just don't talk the talk, really, I walk the walk. I do the work from a grounding perspective of not just throwing big words, decolonial this and decolonial that, but I feel like I can back it up that way.
That's great.
Because when we look at Ubuntu, when we look at being person-centered, it's looking at the person when they come into me. I'm not saying I'm not seeing color. As you and I are sitting here, someone can see two Black women. I see two diverse women. You bring whatever you bring on the table, and whatever I bring on the table could be totally different. But we live in a culture where someone walks in, she just sees two Black women, and that's about it.
Yeah. And we're trying to bring back that, like, oh no, see color. Like, you need to see us as, preconceived, like preformed person. It's like, what? Have some humility. Like, we're actually, funny enough, like, I feel like our tribes are so very similar, but also very distinct. Like, when you grow up in Africa, there's a way that you can just, like, tell who is of what country and where they're from. And it's not in a way that's like racialized. It's just appreciating people's differences and being like, oh, hey, like, you're Kosa, you're in the Ndebele, like, you're and it's celebrated. But we're not imposing, like, oh, just because you're dark skinned, let me think all these things about you. There's a celebration in the difference. And I also want to, speaking of Africa, well, you brought up very great points, all very great points that I could go on in either direction, but decolonization specifically. What is it about, like, how do you envision decolonization taking shape in the next few years? Because that word has become sort of tricky, where some people are just like, they're assuming that being on time, being punctual, what other traits of whiteness did I read about? There's certain traits of just like being a person that they ascribe to whiteness, and then they say we have to undo this, like the nuclear family and that sort of thing. What separates your, like, decolonization work from maybe stuff that gets kind of lumped into like this woke umbrella that makes it seem like we're just trying to undo humanity and redo it over again?
Right. I think for me, though, even when I renamed my Instagram page to Langa Decolonial, it was more of a reminder for me that we are all colonized beings, and we just need to be conscientious and to be conscious of our ways of knowing and being and doing, just knowing that the Eurocentric ways are not the dogmatic way of doing things, are not the righteous way of doing things. That it's just the idea that we have other cultures, we have people that have their own we have other languages, we have other ways of being. So for me, it's not really like a radical whatever. It's just a reminder for me, because I can't really give out anything that I don't have. So
Yeah.
it's just for me to decolonize myself. And what do I mean by decolonizing myself? It's just that reminder of not upholding English. For instance, I talked about being from Zimbabwe. We learned everything in English. In some classes, you're not even allowed to speak your local language. English just gets that prestigious status because of that. Again, it goes back to that colonialism and what have you. So for me, it's really that gentle reminder that I am this colonized being, and I need to continue to unlearn some of the messages that are really embedded in my psyche, because I think that when we don't question, we just become colonial gatekeepers. We keep recycling the same knowledge and the same information. So for me, that's just what it is. I don't know if it's different. I feel like the mainstream ways of doing things, whether it's anti-racism or decolonialism, it just that either or.
Yeah,
it's either you're racist, either you're black or you're white. It's either you're a decolonial or you're colonizer, colonized.
Exactly.
It just keeps us into racial binaries, and that's really not what I'm about.
Yeah.
If you noticed all my posts, I always say sending Ubuntu vibes and umoja, which is the unity. I do think that we have to coexist. We have to work together. It's that unity piece. So I'm really more of the flexibility. Even you asked me before, and I'm just gonna piggyback back a little bit, when you asked about whether my views have changed. I think that even now, when I'm hearing the narratives of the people that have never been to Africa, I'm starting now to empathize with that perspective of, I do realize the need for them to attach to that label, because it really is a label. You can sugarcoat it all we want, but it is a label, and it's a label that is really colonially rooted. So when you think about it, it's really about being flexible enough to hear other people's perspective, but also reminding myself of who I want to be and maintaining the culture and the knowledges that I have and the learning that I'm doing, and also questioning what is from a Western perspective and what is from an African perspective. Like I said, we do have a lot of colonized intellectuals. We have a lot of people throwing the big words who are not really doing the work, who are talking the talk, really, because talking the talk is easy. It's easy to talk, but what are we tangibly doing?
Yeah. I like that you used Ubuntu, because when we naturally, if you other yourself or like you separate yourself into factions of us versus them, that's already like, it's stepping away from Ubuntu. And in a way, we hear Ubuntu used a lot in these like anti-racist circles, not to demean people who use Ubuntu, but I'm just saying that when you take an approach that is very binary and very us versus them, that's automatically like you don't know what Ubuntu is, and you're misappropriating the term. So anyway, I am so grateful for everything that you have shared, Shayla. I thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation with me. I'm definitely learning a lot, especially these past couple months. That whole concept, ever since you asked that question, has made me realize like a new layer of like, oh, I understand what you mean by like the label Black. And so I'm kind of opening my mind and kind of learning about that right now. So thank you so much. And I would love to open the floor to you to share how people can connect with you. Where can they find you? Please, by all means.
Right. My two main social media that I use is the Instagram. I am Langa, which is Langa Decolonial Healing. So at Langa Decolonial Healing, that is Instagram. And I'm also on LinkedIn as Shayla S. Dube, but I can also be found on Psychology Today. as also Shayla Dube. So really those are the three main modes of finding me.
Wonderful. Thank you. And is there any books you're reading right now? Any music that you're listening
to? There is a Dr. Sabelo Ndlovu. So Sabelo and DNDLOVU. He is a decolonial epistemology social scientist and researcher. Funny enough, I can't think of his books, but he's written 21 of them on decoloniality and all of that. And he was a professor in South Africa, and I think he's currently in Germany. But I really love his perspectives. They are fresh and they are not written from that westernized civilization perspective. So when he talks about decoloniality, decolonizing, and all of that, it's from a perspective that I, as an African person, I can relate to. So I just encourage people to Google him up. But I think if you ask me of a book, there is a decolonial feminist book that I'm reading.
Okay, all right.
But I can't think of the author. I'm very bad with names, but I think if you search it up, it comes up. So I'm reading a lot of decolonial stuff, and I think I found a niche in that. I specialized in identity-based trauma and racial trauma. So I just find that on these streets, there's a lot of noise. It's good to have a niche and stick with it. And that is my niche at the moment, just working with people that do struggle. Because I think, and I liked your point about the victimhood. It really centered a lot. And I think I could relate. There was a point in my life where I thought I was just, that victimhood narrative was the focal narrative. So I think, I thank you for that piece as well.
My pleasure. I really appreciate it. Like, yeah, I totally appreciate it. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for connecting with me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I will link all the ways to connect with Shayla in the description below. Otherwise, guys, let me know your thoughts. But there's been a lot of like new stuff, I'm sure. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.
Thank you.